You're very welcome indeed to the fourth webinar now organised by Ireland for a World Beyond War. And thank you very much for participating. There's a poll on the screen which we encourage you to do. It'll be just there for a few minutes. I just want to remind everyone that it's possible to make comments and write questions using the chat that you'll find in the bar below the screen. Of course, if you don't want to use the chat, you can just click it closed. Everyone is muted. The videos are off. I kindly ask everyone to be kind and respectful when using the chat. I now want to introduce our host for today, Eamon Rafter. Eamon is an educator and an activist on peace and social justice issues. He is a member of the World Beyond War Irish chapter. And now leave the floor open to Eamon Rafter to begin our conversation. Thank you.
This evening's webinar, it's great to have you. In this series, we have been looking at a range of issues around militarism and war in the contemporary world. Tonight, we want to focus on what we think is an urgent and very important issue, the issue of human displacement as a consequence of war, violence, and persecution. Throughout human history, people have had to endure the consequences of war, destruction, famine, and sometimes environmental devastation. And in Ireland, this is very much a part of our own history, with especially through the experience of the famine. But today, the effects have become globalized. And now at least 70 million people are forcibly displaced all over the world, according to the UNHCR. And this is the highest level ever. So that gives you an idea of the extent of the problem we're facing. The response to widespread forced migration has been militarized borders and often a climate of fear, hostility, and resentment. Solidarity and generosity have unfortunately been less common and less evident, perhaps. So in this conversation tonight, we want to look at the human costs of war. We want to hear from people whose lives have been directly affected. Our guests tonight bring their stories, their experience, and their own perspectives to this topic. So first, I just want to introduce our speakers tonight, and then I'll just explain a little bit about how the process will work. So we have two guests tonight, and it's wonderful to have them. Our first guest I want to introduce is Suad Aldarra. And Suad is a Syrian storyteller and a data scientist, and she's based in Dublin. She's interested in using technology for human good, and she's currently writing a book about home and diaspora, which hopefully we'll all soon get a chance to read. Our second guest is Yaser Alashqar. Yaser is Palestinian. He was born in Gaza, also living in Dublin now, and he is currently adjunct assistant professor in the International Peace Studies MPhil program at Trinity College in Dublin. And Yaser has written extensively on Palestinian affairs and Middle East politics generally. So in a second, we'll go straight to the discussion with our guests. And then as we do that, please put your questions into the chat. And our colleague Barry Sweeney will then at the end put those questions to our guests. So let us get started then. And I want to go straight away to Suad. Suad, you're very welcome. It's great to have you. Suad, you have written and you are writing about home and leaving of home. And your experience in Syria was of leaving a war-torn country and all that involves. Can you tell us a little bit about the circumstances that around your leaving and coming to Ireland? just to introduce the subject.
Hi, Iman, and thanks for having me today. And thanks for everyone for organizing this very important event. Well, a bit about my background. So I was born in Saudi Arabia. I lived there my early years before going back to Syria, my homeland, in 2003. I studied software engineering there, and I worked there till 2012. At the beginning of the war in Syria in 2011, I was doing, I think, really good at that point of my life. I had a job that I liked in software engineering. I I had friends. I had a cat. I was doing piano lessons, and I was in love. So everything was fine at that point. And we didn't think that things would get that complicated at when things started. We kept hoping that it will be wrapped up at some point, like it did happen in other countries, but then it only got worse and worse. So after 2 years of resisting the idea of leaving the country, things were getting worse and worse. At that time, explosions, I think, like, it was full in the news, like all the conflict explosions, the lack of electricity, water, all the life necessary things. At some point, when I took the decision to leave, there was a close by explosion to my house. It became dangerous to stay there. And that's when I decided to leave along with my husband. But it was a tough decision to make. I wasn't prepared for it. For me, like, I wanted to stay there and help. I was already doing first aid courses, and I was listed my name with the Red Cross to volunteer, stay there and volunteer. But at some point, like, it's life or death situation. So we left together, my husband and I, to Egypt at first, and we stayed there, hoping to start a new life. But then a couple of months in Egypt, then a military coup took place, and things also went into chaos there. And one of its results was that Syrians were banned in Egypt. We weren't allowed to renew our visas, and new Syrians weren't allowed to come. So we had to look for another option, because overnight we became illegal suddenly. So we started looking for other options, and we decided to look for jobs, basically, and try to get a work visa somewhere. And that's how I ended up in Ireland. I was lucky enough to get a job offer, basically, that saved my life. And I came to Ireland. I started working as a software engineer with a tech company. Unfortunately, my husband couldn't join me because of a visa. Of course, like, we'll talk about the visa, I guess, because it shaped my life completely. But he managed to follow me after a few months. And yeah, so I've been in Ireland for 7 years now. Still struggling with the weather, but love the people.
Suad, can I just ask you, what was it like to leave, like, everything behind like that for you, family, all that, you know?
It never gets easy. Like, it's 7 years now in Ireland. I don't think it ever gets easy. But you kind of accept it. You try to find peace with it. Like, for me, writing a book about it was my way of trying to make peace with it. But at some point it was very hard to struggle with, hard to understand it. And the more you try to understand the things you left behind or what you're doing here, the more you go crazy, because it doesn't make any sense. War doesn't make any sense. And it's just complicated. So that's what I like about the topic of today. That's like the human cost of war, because people don't usually talk about that. It's all about statistics and politicians and camps and boats and all of that, but people don't humanize it enough. They don't talk about the humans behind all those titles in the news and behind the war, what happened to them. So leaving everything behind was definitely tough, and finding myself between those two worlds, the world that I left and the world that I'm living in. Sometimes it feels like an identity crisis, like, who am I anymore? Who I am anymore? I don't know who I am anymore. Some days are tough, some days are fine. I know it's like integration, but sometimes integration feels like an identity crisis. And I feel there is another person, the person that used to be in Syria, it's still inside me. She's still inside me, but I look different. I speak different. I speak in English. I don't speak in Arabic anymore. It's like a whole new identity. So I try to keep peace with that. But yeah, I hope the book will make sense of it.
Great. Okay, and we look forward to that too. Thank you, Suad. So Yaser, just to turn to you, I'm sure some of that will resonate with you as a person who grew up in Gaza, spent the first 20 years or so of your life in Gaza, and like many people in Gaza, families who already had been internally displaced, at a previous stage. I mean, how is it for you living under what we could call a siege, if you like, or it is now a siege, but what was it like for you in Gaza growing up?
Thanks, Eamon, and thanks the organizers for having us this evening, myself and Suad. It's great to be with you this evening and to share. Well, in terms of Gaza, I think before we talk about Gaza, we must recognize the context of Gaza, and you've mentioned some of it, Eamon, in relation to the blockade. So let me just go back in time a little bit in terms of Gaza. Gaza's population are more or less about 2 million people. Now, according to international data, UN data, about 52% of Gaza population are children under the age of 18. So you're largely talking about a child population in Gaza. Half of the population are young people. Now, the second fact about Gaza is that Gaza has been under Israeli occupation and control since 1967. And this occupation has been continuing since then. The occupation is very difficult for people, and it's very oppressive, and it's very controlling. And it does force people to leave their home country, and it does make people make difficult choices in life, such as resorting to violence, such as using military means. By no means I support that, but I think it's a reality of life. The third important point about Gaza, in addition to the child population and then the occupation, is you're talking about the siege. Gaza has been under siege, as you said, Eamon, since 2007. And Gaza has experienced the closure before, but this one since 2007 has been very tough, has been very organized, if you like, has been very systematic in terms of containing Gaza people in where they are and controlling them. Gaza is under siege by air, by land, and by sea. And let's remember here, while we're talking about Gaza, that it's the only place in the world where you have a civilian population that is under attack by the Israeli military, but yet the civilians aren't able to leave. So they are stuck, they are trapped in this small territory. And they haven't been able to manage or to find a safe location in this context. So, you're talking about a very difficult situation that involves occupation, that involves military attacks, that involves the siege on Gaza. And also, let's be honest and say it, Israel also gives the excuse that we are bombing Gaza because of Hamas. But I mean, really, if you look at it, what you find is what they are bombing is civilian people, and what they're bombing is civilian houses. My family home and my sister's home was attacked. Was she involved in Hamas? No. Some of my nephews and nieces were involved before in they were involved in those in Gaza, and some of them got injured and so on. Were they Hamas? No, they were not Hamas. They are innocent people living in Gaza. So what you see there really is not a war against Hamas. It's an Israeli war against the civilian population and the refugee population of Gaza. And the last point about the refugees, you mentioned that already, is 70% of people in Gaza are refugees from historical Palestine. 70% who have been forced to leave their homes since 1948, since the creation of Israel and Palestine. So you're talking about a child population, an occupied population, you're talking about a population under siege, and you're talking about a refugee population. That's the context of Gaza. And it is very tragic. It's very tragic and it's very sad.
So just in relation to that, Yaser, can I ask you, as you say, migration, even forced migration, is hardly an option for so many people. I don't know if you can remember, but one time the two of us were working together with a secondary school, and we were talking about the crisis and the situation in Gaza. And one of the students, who was a brave individual, put up his hand and he said, "Oh, if it's so bad in Gaza, why don't people just leave?" Of course, I think you certainly understood where he was coming from with his question, thinking that, people can leave if they don't like it. But how do you deal with that sort of, the attitude that people think, oh, if you don't like it, just go somewhere else?
Yeah, I agree with you. To be honest with you, it's not a straightforward question. Leaving Gaza isn't an option for the majority of people there. Gaza, as I said, is under total Israeli control, is under blockade, under siege from land, from air, and from sea. So really, there is very little opportunity for people to leave Gaza and to manage to get out of this place. That's the practical reason, I suppose, for why many people haven't been able to leave. The second reason is for many people, and we have to understand this. What we see on the outside as a war situation and conflict situation, many people see it as their home, and this is where they were born, and this is where they have been living for the rest of their lives. So it's not an easy question to come and say, well, it's a difficult situation. It's very terrible. Why don't you leave? Like my parents, I offered them, because I do have as you know, Irish citizenship here. I offered to. My father passed away, but before that, I had offered him, he and my mom, to come over and join me in Ireland. But he said, "Look, son, this is where I grew up. I didn't, I came from historical Palestine. His hometown was somewhere now where people call Israel." And he said, but I grew up in Gaza as a young man, and he said, "You enjoy Ireland, I'll carry on in Gaza. That's my home, and this is where I've come from." So people have a sense of pride. People have a sense of dignity about a place where we think it's a terrible place. Why should they live there? Why shouldn't they leave? So can I deny them that sense of pride and dignity and belonging? No, I can't do that. So we've got to appreciate that sense of connection with home, that sense of being close to what you know and being around your family and your community. Now, I understood that student and what he meant. He was, he was an innocent young boy. We showed him, I think, a video about Gaza. He felt very sorry about it, and his immediate reaction was, well, if I'm experiencing this, I'll just get up and leave. And I had to explain that's not the case in Gaza for the practical reasons that I suggested around the siege and the blockade, and also, the fact that people have, have that strong sense of identity and where they are, and they want to be and to stay connected to their home, that is Gaza. So we need to get away from that notion that if this is a terrible place, why don't people leave it?
Thanks, Yaser. Okay, let's kind of move the conversation a little bit to Europe now, because you know, we've been looking in this series of webinars at, you know, Europe's responsibility in global wars, and it's interesting that both, I think, Syria and Palestine, if we look back, we'll see earlier colonial endeavors, which had quite a lot to do with the conflicts in those countries. But Suad, can I just ask you, in terms of Europe, I mean, are there a lot of barriers placed in the way? I mean, you talked about visas and that issue. I mean, as well as the physical borders that are put up, what about, you know, the borders of bureaucracy, and, if you like, the paper borders that sometimes cause equal difficulty to people who want to migrate and are actually looking for perhaps a safer life?
That's true. I think paper borders are difficult, and they affected our lives a lot. And I can't believe the amount of money that was paid to put up those paper borders and to prevent people from coming over. I think you must be too desperate, and that's the only way to go through the sea. And I can't believe that this is the only, it sounds very simple, like I don't understand it. Why is it not possible for migrants to come over through like a regular visa like everyone else? I mean, like, there's always this association between migrants and illegal, especially in the UK news, that like in one of the years, it was the most associated word with migrants, that's illegal, that they are here in an illegal way. And the thing that people don't say, or the media doesn't say, that there is no legal way for them to come over. Like, I mean, I was really lucky that I got this job offer, but it was extremely difficult, and it took so much time to get the paperwork done, and to do all the visa and the passport and all of that. And even that, after that, I had to decide whether to stay with my husband in Egypt or to leave him and try to get reunited again. But yeah, it's not easy for refugees or for migrants. And if it was that simple, like if they could apply, because they're paying a lot of money for smugglers or to get in risky ways to get over here. But why isn't it easier than that? I still don't understand. Like, I mean, I've been to the European Commission in 2016, and I spoke about this. They wanted me to address this problem and what's the challenges behind it. But I don't think anything has changed since. And to have this, I think after that, then the deal between EU and Turkey has been done to stop all the migrants. But that was like, it was worse. It could have been done really in a better way, in an easier way. This is not the way that you treat people who are running away from war. And yeah, paper border is just it's just complicating everything. And I think that's the point where it's hard to explain for people who didn't have to deal with visas, who can just go to the airport and get on the first plane and go anywhere. It's hard to explain it.
Yaser, for you, again, if we move the story to Ireland a little bit, because again, in one of the earlier events in this series, the statement was made that, you know, Ireland is not a complete innocent bystander in all of this. So, you know, as a Palestinian person who finds himself now living in Ireland, resident in Ireland, I mean, what's your take on the way Ireland perceives Palestine, and maybe what could be done, that might offer more prospects for human security for Palestinians, rather than a perpetuation of the situation that goes on?
Thanks, Eamon. Well, first of all, let me say that there is a lot of support for Palestine in Ireland, and this is very clear. There are a lot of civil society groups who are campaigning for Palestinian rights. A lot of people in Ireland are very much aware of what's going on in Palestine. Some of them, and in fact, many of them, to my surprise, have been to that part of the world. They have seen the situation. especially around Jerusalem. As we know, Ireland more or less has been a Catholic country, and a lot of people are interested in religious places in the Holy Land. That's what I suppose older people keep telling me. I was in the Holy Land, and so I try to kind of work it out, and I say in Palestine, and they say, oh yeah, in Bethlehem, so in their head it's the Holy Land, whether it's Israel or Palestine, and that is very important to the Catholic identity, I suppose, and it speaks to that, the idea of the Holy Land. So many people have been there throughout Irish history. Also, you have peacekeepers who have been to Lebanon and to the Middle East, and they are very much aware of what's going on in Lebanon and places like Palestine. There is a strong affiliation between nationalist, in general, people in Ireland and nationalist people in Palestine. People identify with Palestine as a struggle for freedom, as a struggle for political rights, a struggle against occupation and colonialism. They see it similar to what happened to them in relation to Britain. Now, all of this is good, Eamon, and that's important. It's great that we have this support and this understanding and the connection with Palestine. And when it comes to action, you find really two pictures. One is the civil society action that is very strong. For example, a group like the Ireland-Palestine Solidarity Campaign is very active. Kolov is very active. Sadaka is very active. So it's really, there's good energy there. There's good work there. There's good support there. But when it comes to the government level, you don't find the same level of energy there, the same level of support. What you find is a little bit disappointing, to be honest with you. One of those disappointing points is around the arms trade with the Israeli military. Ireland, more or less, is involved in the arms trade through the US, involved with that, with the Israeli military. And that is a big problem and remains a big problem. There is concerning news that Ireland is receiving also training by Israeli military officers. And I mean, I'm talking about the Irish police or the Irish military officers. I'm not sure about this data and this information, but there are reports that this training, this military training, is happening between the Irish military, the Irish police, and also the Israeli security forces. Another really point of concern is about the trade between Ireland and Israel. And Ireland hasn't really used that card to put pressure on Israel to stop its oppression against the Palestinians. And that's still continuing. Another concerning really point is about the research science through the EU, and Israel is participating in that, and through the research science Horizon 2020, 21, and so on. There are security projects and military projects that the EU and Israel is working on that, and Ireland is part of it. I know also some universities, to my own disappointed, some universities in Ireland, without names now, they are participating in these research projects. And it is very concerning, and Ireland could do better, and Ireland should support human rights and justice in Palestine. I'm not saying that Ireland should ignore Israel. Of course, they need to engage with Israel. They have to deal with it as a reality. But really, Ireland is cooperating with Israel and turning a blind eye to what's happening to the Palestinians, and that is very disappointing. And that's not taken away from the support that we have at the civil society level for Palestine and the activism that we have. If you take it at the political level, you find that Ireland was one of the issues between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, one of the sticking issues, if you like, before they formed a joint coalition. I think it was last year, if I remember correctly, before they put together this government between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And the point was about recognizing Palestine and Palestinian freedom and the Palestinian right to statehood. Because the Irish Parliament and activists, a lot of people in the Parliament worked on that to make sure that the issue of Palestinian statehood and Palestinian rights is there in the program for government. But when it came to joining the government, when it came to forming the government together between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they dropped the issue completely, and that was disappointing.
Okay, so yeah, so there's a lot in that which we don't have too much time to go further into. So I'm just going to put out a final question to both of you around this human cost of war. I mean, again, I was looking at some figures, and I saw that the European Union in 2005 they spent 6 million on border security in 2005, and in 2018 that had risen to 320 million. Okay, and the projection is that that is heading for billions. Okay, now that's one statistic. Second one is in 2015, 1 out of 267 people who made the Mediterranean crossing died. 1 out of 267. In 2017, 1 out of 57 people, who made that Mediterranean crossing died. So people are taking greater risks. So, I mean, my question to both of you about human costs: what are the obligations of countries who are living in relative peace? I mean, we have experienced conflict on this island. What are the obligations of countries like Ireland in relation to countries who suffer the consequences of war and violence? Suad, would you like to try that?
I find it amazing how many research conferences ask this question, and politicians would gather to answer this question. And I just find, I can't help it but find the answer really simple. Just open the borders and let people apply for visas in embassies. If you have to do visas, if you don't want to open it completely, just make visas available, because visas are rejected most of the times. Like my brothers tried to apply for a visa just to visit me here, and they were rejected. And they weren't even coming from Syria. They were coming from another country. And it's just really hard and impossible almost to get a normal visa, a regular visa like anyone else. So I think the solution is just make it simpler. The visa process shouldn't be that hard. Life shouldn't be that hard. People shouldn't put their kids on boats and go through the sea and pay smugglers and see their family die in front of them just to be in a safe place. And believe me, maybe people saying that terrorists would come over or people want to come for money. Believe me, many of the people I meet, they didn't want to leave their country. They were happy just sitting there, even if it wasn't the perfect life, but it was their life, their home, around their family. So the media has a huge role in this, making it look like this scary beast is coming over your country. Be aware, shut the doors. But it's not the case.
Okay, yeah, Yaser, final word for you.
Yeah, I agree with Saad. Borders should be open, that people should feel they have the right to move, and without any oppression and without the threats of violence. But also I want to add, Eamon, that European countries and Ireland as well need to think about conflict resolution in those places. They need to support political solutions. They need to support human rights. They need to support economic progress and economic development. And that is very important. We need to take that into account. We can't keep turning a blind eye to human rights abuses, and then we come and complain about refugees coming to us or about migrants coming to us. Well, we're not doing anything about it. We're not contributing to political solutions. We're not contributing to ending oppression, like in the Syrian case or in the Palestinian case, and in many cases around the world. We're not really supporting economic development in those countries. So we need to think beyond humanitarian aid. I know, for example, the answer for many countries around the world, and that's what's happening in Gaza. Well, the answer to Gaza: give them food, give them humanitarian aid. people don't need food. People need freedom. People need rights. People need rights. People need, the opportunity to live without oppression, without occupation, and without the blockade. That's it. Very simple.
Okay, thank you very much, Yaser and Suad, for giving us lots of food for thought. And now I'm going to go back to Barry, who hopefully will have some questions for you.
I do indeed have some questions, but first of all, let me say thank you very much to both of Suad and Yaser. You've spoken so well, so clearly, so simply. Your message is, it goes right to the heart. So for the first question, so Ireland likes to promote itself as the country of the 100,000 welcomes. And I'd like to know a little about your experience of that. Did you find when you arrived that you had a good welcome, or do people equate immigrants, refugee as terrorists? Either one of you can respond to this.
I can answer about my experience. When I arrived in 2014, I remember I was scared that how I remember the passport control moment, and the officer, how when he saw my passport, he was thrown away. He said like, "Wow, from Syria, and how are things in Syria?" And he wanted to ask me how are things there and how are my relatives there. And I was scared he would think of me as the media shows Syrians basically, and migrants and refugees. But he was very nice. And I was suspicious, like, why is he's too nice? And this is the first Irish I met, was the passport control person, and he was extremely welcome, and he was genuinely asking how are things around back home. And I still remember it, like 7 years ago, and I still remember it was a nice welcome in Ireland, and the process was smooth, and he didn't make it any complicated. And even after that, whenever I meet someone Irish, they are really nice. I only had like once an incident with a taxi driver that he was negative about it when he knew I'm from Syria, but other than that, it was a nice welcome, I'd say.
I'm very happy to hear that. Was that similar for you, Yaser, or?
Yeah, I mean, a similar story. It seems like the action is always happening in Dublin Airport. I think that's what Suad is saying. And for me, when I arrived, I think Eamon might know this story. I told him before. I arrived in Dublin Airport without my bags. All the way from Gaza to Dublin Airport, knowing nowhere to go, not sure where I'm landing, not sure what to do. And there I am from Gaza, a boy without bags. And, I found two police officers or immigration officers looking at me at Dublin Airport. And they said, "What's happening, boy?" I said, "Well, I've lost my bags." And they said, "Where are you from?" I said, "From Gaza, Palestine." They said, "Welcome, you'll be grand." And that's what I was told. And I think since then I've been grand. I'm not sure. That's my impression of Ireland. I asked Eamon afterwards. I said, what did that mean? Can you offer some translation about being grand? I didn't understand it. I did study English, but I didn't understand that word in particular in that context. And he said, "It means we're not sure what we are doing, but you'll be fine. You'll find your bags." And finally, I got my bags. Apart from this story, no, I mean, there has been, to be honest with you, a general welcome in general, I felt welcome in Ireland from my experience. I've worked with Eamon, I've worked with many colleagues, and there has been, a good understanding and good support about Palestine. But let me also say, Barry, that I am concerned about the reports we are getting in Dublin about attacks against immigrants, and that's really worrying. There are violent attacks on people, especially people who are coming from outside Ireland, and that is worrying.
Absolutely. And actually that brings me nicely to the next question. It's about how we can help European people, not just Irish, but European people. How can we bring the reality, the situation, so that they can appreciate better what it's like for people outside Fortress Europe, so that we can not be so aggressive in our defenses and open the borders. So any sort of ways that we can help Europeans learn, any peace tourism, or are there sports events that we could try to partake that would help highlight to us, or virtual tours we can do so we can see what it's really like there? Suad?
So just to make sure I understood the question correctly, so how can European be more aware of the situation, basically?
Yes,
so there's awareness?
yes, so that we can be more friendly and more open, because I think the more we understand, the more we will open.
Yeah, that's true. I think human by nature are afraid of what they don't know. And many Europeans think about the whole Middle East as a one place. Maybe people are on camels or in the desert, like how it shows in the movies sometimes, with the big bazaar shop and people are still on camels. So I think the media plays a huge role in all those stereotypes about this unknown part of the world. So it's good to know more. But how, well, there have been movies about the Middle East, about Syria, about the war. I think like I was involved also in a book publishing program where it was focusing on underrepresented writers, so giving voices for writers to write, because I believe writers having books and stories from those parts of the world is more important than news, basically, or more than history books, because stories gives you the background and the stories that happen between the lines of the history books, and away from that makes it more human. So giving that voice to writers, to maybe actors, to be able to tell the narrative from their side of from their sides, basically. That's what I have in mind. I don't know, maybe Yaser have more ideas.
To be honest with you, I just want to add that I think you've said it more or less, Suad. There's also the point about intercultural dialogue. We need to support that dialogue. We need to enable people to come together with what we call refugees. And by the way, we might have to think again about this label of being a refugee and what it means, because it's more than being a refugee. We need to bring people from different backgrounds together, something that Eamon and myself have been involved in informally in previous years. So that dialogue has to continue between the new communities in Ireland, in European countries, and the people who have been living here. We also need to support educational projects. We need to look at schools. I know from my experience in Ireland, I've been to many schools talking and sharing my experience. And, you know, many of them told me that they haven't had this chance before to meet people from outside Ireland and from a conflict situation who can share their story with them. So I think the Department of Education can do more in Ireland, certainly, to support educational projects to allow people to meet and talk more. Finally, I think we need to deal with the fear that we have from right-wing parties in Europe. You've mentioned Europe, Barry, and we need to deal with that. And there is a lot of propaganda, there is a lot of fear that is being promoted out there. Fear from refugees, fear from strangers, fear from outsiders. And this is all for political reasons and for election reasons. So we need to stop exploiting refugees and migrants who have been traumatized throughout their journey and throughout their life. We need to stop exploiting them at the political level.
Absolutely well said, both of you. In fact, I see a brand new question, Suad, in the chat now. Caroline is wondering, is the book fiction or non-fiction, but where is it also available? Where can people buy these books, or the platform where these artists and writers can tell their stories?
Well, my book is still it's still not published yet. It's like I wrote a first draft of it, and I've already have an agent, a brilliant one, and we're working on contacting publishing houses. But it's going really well. I hope to have some good news to share really soon. But yeah, it's still not available.
Okay, we will wait with bated breath.
Hopefully, yeah.
Very good. I think that's us out of time, really. I would like to again thank you guys so much for coming. I'd love to continue. In fact, I do hope we speak again in the future. I liked your point, Yaser, about the Department of Education and school visits, and there are many quite simple things that could be implemented that could help raise the awareness of people. And maybe we could bridge the difference between the people and the politicians, because that's where the gap is in Ireland at the moment. So yes, and I think Pauline, you will give us our little conclusion.
Well, I'd like to say thank you as well. It's just I've loved listening to it. You can see the results of the poll there on your screens. And so that is a very clear answer, I think. And just to tell you that you can register for webinar number 5, the last one in our initiating series, actually, from the Irish chapter of World Beyond War, and that'll be held next Wednesday. Now, just to say as well that you can find, go to the WorldBeyondWar.org Ireland site, and you'll actually find as well recordings of the previous talks, and please share them with as many people as you can, because as Yaser has so eloquently told us, it's and Suad also, that it's not the mainstream media who's going to give the news that matters. And do get involved as well by signing the peace declaration on the World Beyond War site. And this will allow us to let you know how you can take part if you're interested in it. And if you don't have time to offer but would like to support, again, the site can tell you how to make a donation. And just remind you too that to subscribe to our Twitter, Facebook and Instagram page, and you'll find us with the name of Ireland for a World Beyond War.